So we will start. Thank you for your patience. So let's start, but the backdrop is not changed yet.
Oh, it's good.
It's good? Oh, good.
It's good.
I'm not used to that red track. Okay. So good morning. My name is Teresa. I work for IDEMIA. I'm the P&L owner of Smart Credentials for IDEMIA Public Security in North America. We do a lot of work on digital identity sector, so I'm really glad that I get to moderate this panel. I'm the co-chair of the GDWG, Government Deployment Working Group for Federal Alliance, and Paul, which is supposedly my co-host, co-moderator of this panel, now become panelist, is one of the co-chair of the Identity Verification Working Group. Yeah. So we kind of combine together to do this, join forces to do this panel together.
Actually, shameless plug, we don't have a co-chair, and we could use one, so.
He's asking for a co-chair.
I have a wonderful vice chair, though, so.
Yeah. Wink, wink. Who wants to step up?
The co-chair spot is open.
We have co-chair and vice chair, but we want participation in GDWG. So, all right, let's start with you, Paul. So can you just describe some of the use cases that you do at Amazon when it comes to identity proofing?
Sure. So I would say, for lack of a better word, the typical journey for a customer is to never have to proof themselves when they are transacting or shopping online. You can create an account with a bogus first or full name. We'll verify a communication channel, whether it's email or mobile with an OTP, and then you can shop away, and at the end, at checkout, we'll ask for a shipping address and a payment instrument, and none of that is really verified. We don't know the underlying human. That's not a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. We protect the account. We have very stringent controls to protect the account from account takeover. So we have predictive and detective capabilities as it relates to ATOs, account takeovers. But most people are used to that journey. However, as we build our business and we look beyond just shoppers and start thinking about folks that are selling on Amazon, vendors that sell to Amazon, buying age-restricted products, whether it's bladed products or alcohol with Amazon Fresh, or whatever the store may be called, or getting healthcare services from Amazon One Medical, it used to be Amazon Clinic. We need to either verify an attribute older than, or verify the human or the individual completely. So we need to know if you're going to come to get clinical health or telemed, we're going to need to know that it's you. So HIPAA comes into play there. And then as more and more regulations come online, as we're seeing in the EU with EIDAS, we are being mandated to provide the option for customers to identify themselves to us. So a lot more identification related or verified attribute-based use cases than I think one would expect from an Amazon if you're used to just shopping. But that's kind of the range of use cases. We do other things like employee verification. And I'm trying to think of one other use case, but that gives you a good idea of where we're at.
Thank you. It's good to set the tone, set the stage why it's everywhere. It's not just a government side, and the relying party relies on being able to have the ability to do identity proofing. But identity proofing, it's hard. It's difficult. I think a lot of studies have shown that it's actually not everyone perform the same. So when it comes to testing identity proofing, Arun, you have one thing or two to say about it, and experience you have done. So I was wondering if you can help us just do a summary of what DHS S&T has done and the takeaway, and you can just, if you can, comment on the last study that GSA did.
Sure. So thanks, Teresa. So my name is Arun Vemury with the DHS Science and Technology Directorate. We are a research and development group within Homeland Security. And if you think about Homeland Security, a lot of what it is really risk management. Right? How do you better manage risks? And a lot of that comes down to knowing who you're interacting and working with. So identity is key for a lot of different DHS missions and operations, whether it's who flies on a plane, who crosses a border, who's engaging in different financial transactions, whatever it might be. There's a lot of places where identity comes into play. And one of the things that my group is specifically looking at doing is better characterizing how well technologies work, helping to support the development of new standards, putting out industry challenges so people can help create more innovative technologies that work better, and helping to inform the development of new standards. Earlier this year, actually starting last year, we did a new challenge where we obviously realized that there was a lot of things happening online, right? After COVID, everything moved online that ever could, largely because it was incredibly convenient, it was lower cost for a lot of providers. But fundamentally, the question was, well, how well do these things work, right? If I take a photo of a driver's license, how well can I tell that it's a real driver's license? If I take a selfie, can I tell that that's a real human being, not someone's social media profile photo? If I take a selfie and match it to a photo ID or driver's license, how well does that work too? So we set up a methodological process to evaluate each one of those pieces and to understand how well these technologies work individually. Similarly, there was actually a different tack that GSA did where they looked at an entire solution end to end and how well does that process work. I think the long story short here is we kind of just assume these technologies work. We want them to work, right? They're incredibly powerful, incredibly convenient, but the error rates are not trivial. And typically, I think one thing that we saw that was both similar for the DHS study and the GSA studies, error rates can easily be on the order of 10%, right? And that's genuine people trying to apply for benefits or services or something, and they are not able to complete that process. We won't even go into fraudulent transactions where people are specifically trying to attack these processes. Not only do we see that it's really hard for legitimate people to complete the process, we see, and there's a couple reasons, right? Like my mother and her sisters have to use these technologies. They are not very good at using these technologies. Technologies need to be secure and easy to use, but also difficult and have enough friction so that an expert adversary can't do them, right? That's not easy. Assuming that some of the underlying evidence works well across the board for various authentication methods doesn't necessarily hold up. Like your driver's license was designed for specific purposes. Assuming that the security features are going to be visible in a smartphone photo that was not designed to interrogate a document and figure out whether it was real or fake, we can't just assume that those things magically work. Anyway, long story short, error rates can be high. We're also seeing that errors are not necessarily uniformly distributed, that in some cases they may correlate with things like age, with skin tone, and other demographic factors. So you have to think about like how these technologies are being deployed and whether or not they're actually creating some burdens for legitimate users who are trying to access your benefits and services. Did I hit any of the points you wanted me to hit?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
And being very fair with the participant, I would just comment on that all those technology evaluations are volunteer process, right? The vendor community volunteer, submit application to do its investment also on behalf of I'm representing the tech vendor here, right? This is a plug. Then we have to apply, get selected, volunteer to do it. So DHS run a version more on the component level, and then the GSA one is more a whole full-on solution. And all are volunteer basis. So that's not like a DHS, GSA just to pick a vendor. We all have to volunteer and go through the process. What I like about it is I think Arun, you kind of set the tone versus the NIST evaluation. The results are anonymized. It means that the vendor are protected if they're not doing well, it's okay. You can learn from it. You can use those feedback loop to improve your performance, and not necessarily public. So while the data is public, you don't know really who's who and how they perform. So that's a good thing in terms of driving innovation. But I think there are other challenges why it's hard, not just because the algorithm side is getting difficult, but there are also different kind of attacks, like, well, I'm gonna say AI. I've been avoiding using AI this entire conference because I think it's overused sometimes. But with generative AI, with injection attacks, that makes the identity proofing process also vulnerable and difficult, right? I know that you have looked at sort of the detection piece. What's the key takeaway with the recent evaluation?
Yeah, so it is challenging, right? And it's hard to have a solution that catches all the fraud, but then doesn't reject a large number of people who are genuine users. So that in general is this is a classic, classification type of error where you're kind of trading off between, do I make it more lenient or do I make it more security focused? And finding the right balance for your organization is going to be the key, right? You're never going to completely eliminate these things. On top of that, the threat profile, the landscape changes so quickly. I think the whole point here is things that used to be secure and pretty well established and trusted are no longer secure and trusted, right? A lot of times where people weren't sure about an identity proofing process, like, okay, we'll do a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever. Well, now that is the choice attack vector for a lot of fraudsters because they can specifically use real-time face swaps and generative AI technologies to attack the human being instead of attacking the facial recognition software or other tools. And I think this is going to keep changing. It's going to keep evolving. So, I like to point out, like way back when, like one of the things you'd have to use to prove out your ID is you show up with your utility bill with your address and stuff, right? Like that does not have the same weight back then that it does now because we all have word processing software and printers and things like that. And this is going to keep changing. I think we as a community, as we look at these different factors that could be used to help verify identity or to identity proof people, we also need to be understanding of like how the risks are going to change, how new technologies, changes in business processes are going to strengthen or weaken some of these different factors. It's going to be a challenge. There's a lot of moving parts here. To that said, Gen AI and identity proofing processes are kind of scary. You can come up with create a synthetic, have a synthetic identity, create a very realistic looking photo ID document, have it generate a face, have it generate names and dates of birth and addresses, all that are very realistic, and that'll pass some of the doc validation techniques, right? There's a lot there. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of challenges, and I think it's incumbent upon us. Like, it's not just about having a standard, it's also looking at how are the risks changing and are our processes still robust over time?
Thank you, Arun. It's actually a perfect segue to Bill. So Bill, we haven't heard from you yet, but Arun talked about risk. And actually you look at the latest draft of 863, it's actually start with that. So I'm gonna give the floor to you just to summarize the latest update that we did, that the NIST did into the 863 Part A, because they are general section Part A, Part B, Part C. We're just gonna focus on Part A because it's bigger volume. Can you talk about that, some of the update there?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Bill Fisher. For those of you who don't know me, I am a member of the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence at NIST, one of the security engineers there. I must admit I'm not part of the 863 team, so like if you want to go at somebody for the document and the content that's in there, find some of my colleagues. I won't even name them, but you can find them.
Yeah, I did. Just throw them under the bus.
Yeah. Yeah, one of them may be in the room.
Where? Oh, okay. Hey, Andy.
But before I get into sort of 63 and so some of the updates we've made in Part A, I just wanted to talk about like the identity verification being hard, right? That Arun was just touching on. You know, when I think about identity verification, right, we really are talking about a multivariate challenge, right? We have security concerns, we have privacy concerns, we have accessibility concerns, equity concerns, usability concerns, right? And so this really isn't, the way I like to think about it is it's not really a problem to be solved, but attention to be managed, right? It's an optimization challenge where we have all these different variables that we're trying to work with and figuring out what the best solution is, you know. For any given relying party, they're making trade-offs to figure out what the best solution for them is. And then from a NIST perspective, right, when we write standards and guidelines and best practices, we are trying to figure out, you know, how do we couch all these inputs so that's useful for relying parties and they can understand the implications of some of these trade-offs, while also establishing things that are more baseline, like, hey, for equity, you should be looking at this. For privacy and usability, you should be looking at these things. And then one of the other reasons it's really hard is that it's fundamentally probabilistic versus deterministic, and this is something that I talk about, you know, in a lot of contexts. NIST typically talks about this in the context of authentication, right? So, you know, something like a cryptographic key, that cryptographic system is deterministic, right? So you use that key, you will get the same outcome each time. There should only be one key that matches for that key pair, that type of thing. Versus, you know, biometric verification is a probabilistic system, right? You know, the FBI spends $1 billion trying to figure out how to get the fingerprint matching, right, for criminal records checks and other things to 5, 6, 9s, right? So 99.9999%, but it'll never be deterministic. It'll never be 100%. And for that reason, you're always going to have those error rates, right, that Arun was talking about, and you're always going to need things like a fallback mechanism. We talk about in authentication all the time, you know, account recovery, right, which is basically, you know, a way around your authentication system from an attacker's point of view, right? And the same thing goes for identity proofing and verification, right? We need to get people through the system. We need to get them access to services, right? In the case of things like government benefits and whatnot, they are entitled to these types of services. And so all those things make it quite difficult. And as you can imagine, makes it difficult on NIST trying to write the guidance in this space. And so, so for those of you who aren't familiar, just jumping into some of the 63 updates, 800-63 is currently out in second public draft. So there was a first public draft period, a bunch of comments came in, second public draft period. That just closed up, so.
October 7, it was
yeah,
very short.
That's right. Yeah, it's not always under our control how long the periods go out there, but I think we make up for that by the fact that we do try to come to all these events, right? We do try to be a part of the community. We're always willing to take feedback, right? Even when you're yelling at us, it doesn't fall on deaf ears, right? We're happy to take the criticism and then consider it. And so we just recently closed up that public comment period, but the second public draft is out there for you to read, and there's 4 different parts, but part A is the part that really handles identity proofing, identity verification, that type of thing. And so just to highlight some of the things we kind of updated and changed in that document. So the first thing we really looked at was coming off of a document that Paul actually authored, which was 863 version 3. We got a lot of feedback on part A from that section. And one of the things that we were told was basically when you were using 63.3, when you were looking at the delta between the IAL, right, so Identity Assurance Level 1 and Identity Assurance Level 2, for those not aware, I think everybody probably is, there's 3 assurance levels in the IALs. Between Assurance Level 1 and Assurance Level 2, you basically didn't have enough granularity for relying parties, right? So IAL 1 was sort of like a zero proofing thing, right? So the user just comes and self-asserts all this information, and then IAL 2 was, all right, now you're jumping straight into proofing the individual and doing a biometric verification. And so meeting IAL 2 was seen as, you know, something that was kind of a challenge and maybe a reach for some relying parties and more than what they needed, but also they didn't want to just accept self-asserted attributes and information. So in the new document, we now have a sort of reshuffled or reworked IAL 1, right? Some people have also been referring to the does not exist in the document, but IAL 0. And so what we have is underneath IAL 1, you now have some proofing, but no requirements for a biometric match. And then the IL0 you'll hear people talk to is essentially that old self-asserted model. So that was one big shift in terms of how do we make these IALs more approachable for relying parties. And then another one of the big shifts that we wanted to jump into was the concept of what we call a trusted referee, right? So I talked before about some of those like usability and equity and accessibility challenges in identity verification and proofing, and how do we get people through that process? And so you can think of sort of a quadrant, right? So when you're doing proofing, you have remote and or in-person proofing, and then you also have attended and or unattended proofing. And so in those cases where someone's trying to do a in-person or remote unattended proofing process, you know, and they can't complete that process, how can we help them get through that? We can put a person in the loop there, right? That person can help walk them through the process from a usability perspective. That person can also be part of that verification process. You present the identification information to them. They can help verify that information, that type of thing. I won't go too into detail on this, and I think Arun's more capable of talking about these things, but we also have improved metrics around biometrics, right? So things around performance, things around notice and consent, things around deletion of biometric information, you know, letting the user know about all that type of stuff. And then we also have fraud mitigation metrics, right? So this is a topic that we've been talking about a lot in the MDL project, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and continually comes up for relying parties, right? I think most people probably heard about a lot of the fraud that was happening on online use cases with government benefits and loans going out during COVID and whatnot. And so we now have metrics in there to look at around fraud and fraud management, which are brand new. And these aren't, the metrics aren't different than what a lot of more advanced relying parties are already doing, right? So the idea of like, hey, maybe you should just check if this person is deceased before you try to proof them, right? That's a hard stop at the very beginning of your proofing process. No user friction needed. You're not proofing this individual, right? But other things like, what might the device tenure be, right? Do you know this device? How long has the user had this device? Things like SIM swapping checks, right? If a user recently just switched over their phone number, there might be additional risk that someone's trying to use that person's identity to gain access to online benefits and services and that type of thing. And then the last thing I'll just touch on, which was kind of big, and we'll get into this later in the panel, I think, is the inclusion of digital credentials as a form of evidence during proofing, right? So mobile driver's licenses, verified digital credentials, verifiable credentials. There's a lot of terms in this space right now, but basically the idea that you're going to be bringing some sort of digital ID that's going to be either in a wallet on your phone or in a wallet on the cloud, and use that as a piece of evidence and a piece of strong or superior evidence to proof your identity to relying parties.
Thank you, Bill. That's a very good summary, high level. Thank you. So actually, Paul, back to you. So with Amazon.com, you have been driving this technology implementation. So what is your approach right now to stay up to the art of the possible of today?
Yeah, we have multiple mechanisms to proof individuals, and some are kind of compliance driven, some are requirements driven, but it's a suite of capabilities. We've got the simple demographic check that we all kind of know and hate. We've got the presentation of a government ID with a selfie, which we're starting to hate as well, from a usability perspective and a security perspective. And then what we're going to start doing in 25 is accepting digital IDs from wallets. So MDLs, e-passports, national IDs, we're global, so we're looking beyond just the US. So Europe with national IDs, MDLs, and e-passports in the US, even federated identity, Aadhaar in India, will be part of the suite of capabilities that we have. And that does a couple things. It gives users some choice in the mechanism they want to use. It gives us an ability to help determine what may be the best path for a given user. In that government ID selfie scenario, we're taking a multi-vendor approach, not only for resiliency, but for also for coverage. Vendor A may do the US really well, and then we don't need vendor B to do US. We need vendor B to do East Asia or something like that. So, and we're looking at those vendors right now. But we are doubling down on digital credentials in hopes that, like passkeys, we can retire these other things. So we kind of see MDLs and e-passports and national IDs, digital IDs, as the passports for identity, or the passkeys for identity. And we love it because I won't get into what a lot of the back end work, but the way we're selecting the digital IDs that we're going to use are the ones that are going all the way to the authoritative source. So if you think about Google and Apple, they're going to the DMV, to that DMV template to do the match with the user when they're bootstrapping the license out of band from any Amazon process. So we're not sitting there saying, hey, go install an MDL. It's either there or it's not.
Yep.
But we like that as opposed to the scraping of the image from the driver's license and matching that to a selfie.
Yes, actually, we got a lot of that comment. It seems that there's a switch in terms of in the landscape of digital identity proofing, that the document capture and selfie check, how we are doing it today, we are pivoting. But sometimes I got asked, right, does it mean that we don't do doc-off anymore? Or we gonna keep doing doc-off plus, plus, plus? It seems to me that it's not either or, it's an and kind of game.
Right.
And that we are not abandoning the doc-off piece. I think there's still some future evolution still happening with doc-off, right, Arun? That we can look at. But I do see that the digital credential is really moving the digital identity verification game to the next level, to another level, right? To that deterministic level that you talk about.
And it's an experience our customers are familiar with. If when you use Apple Pay, you double click, face in to authorize the transaction, and payment is made. It's the same thing. Instead of pay with Apple, it's verify with Apple, double click to consent to the sharing of attributes, Face ID, and then that information is sent to us.
Power of standards.
Yes.
So Arun, doc-off, is there a future, or it's things gonna keep switching to digital? What do you think?
To your point, I think it's got to be an and, right? At least for some, maybe not for all users. Like, it would be really, in a perfect world, it'd be really nice to be able to switch over to digitally verifiable credentials, right? Something that you could cryptographically use, or something where you have this deterministic outcome, like, yeah, that was a real credential. I don't think that's going to happen in the near term. And I think for government, it's challenging because we'll have a lot of people who honestly either are slow to adopt or honestly have concerns about maybe even tracking and surveillance that might be enabled by digital methods. So we're probably going to have to be able to support both for the foreseeable future. Maybe at some point that will change. Like, these things can change with generations. But I would say right now, like, my group in particular has been very active in helping to support like the development of standards around MDL and ISO, working with NIST on the NCCoE project for advancing mobile digital identity credentials. But we're also looking at, we have to be able to continue to support these things. And we work very closely. We actually have a forensic document lab at DHS where they have an unbelievable number of fraudulent documents. I wish I could take photos and show you, but think about how small a document is, and think about how many bookshelves you can fill on a floor of a building with these things. It's shocking. So actually, as part of our test, we went there and we said, They helped easily curate a set of 1,200 fraudulent documents for us, which we were able to use for evaluations. I know that's very hard for a lot of organizations to do, but it was very fortunate that we could do those things. The way I see it is we're going to have to support both. And there may be a change, right? There may be a natural evolution here over the next, like, let's say 10 years or so, but it's not going to be something that switches overnight. And this is where, one of the reasons are, again, I mentioned it before, people may attack this part of the process, or they'll attack the account takeover part of the process, or account recovery. We're going to have to just, we're going to have to keep our eyes open.
Yeah, I agree. I think this physical and digital duality that people like to pitch each other, and I see that as together, because if you look at the NIST did a really good job with the 863, the second draft, where in the appendix, in the A section, there's appendix example of document evidence. What I saw was, well, if you look at the fair evidence or the strong evidence, what you can do, a lot of the private credentials, like a corporate ID badge, for example, if the security department of the corporate ID design changes to add some sort of cryptographic key or some sort of a signed barcode, I don't know, it will make that credential so much stronger and help the identity proofing process better. So it's sort of this holistic view of how to improve the document. Well, we will never have a chip driver license in the US. Maybe never say never, but apparently I was told it's a pipe dream of mine. So, but what else can we do to enhance that digital machine readable verifiable features to strengthen that process, right? So it's sort of that feedback loop that we need to do, how we can improve the input to get a better output.
It might be worthwhile to mention the thing that for New York State, right?
Yes, yes. So it's not, a New York driver license, they worked with their vendor to actually sign their barcode on the driver license. So that in order to really decode the demographic data that's encoded in the barcode, you need to have that key in order to decode it. So it's pretty smart. And that's just one way of doing it. There are other technology out there that you can have more hidden features, but it's still machine verifiable. So I think there's a sort of a combination to be had. If DocOff is not going away, then the document design, the feature design should be looked at and improve upon it. And oftentimes it's not just government ID can do that. Private ID can do that. Actually, we have one of our project. It's for a private ID card where they actually want to put all those security features in there.
Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, but that New York implementation I think was done mostly so they could verify lottery winners in the state. Is what I'd heard, right? And so it's always just interesting,
lottery, like how many lottery winner that is you need to put the pack?
For sure, right? It was such a large amount of money, right? And my only reason for bringing that up is that we think about this type of stuff at the Center of Excellence at NIST all the time, right? It's like the most straightforward path to convincing a relying party to implement what you want from a security or privacy or usability or whatever perspective, like may not be the path that you is most effective, right? All the time, I'm thinking, great, if I want to get people to adopt like digital credentials, I'll tell them the benefits about the security, or I'll tell them the benefits around the usability, or I'll tell them the benefits around the fraud reduction, right? But sometimes it's this little side channel thing that's like, oh, that's what's actually going to get the company to move, right? So we always, at the center at least, when we think about these systems, and I said earlier about them being multivariate, like these are the types of things we have to think about. So.
Well, how about you talk about, I think it's good time to switch and do a little plug about the MDL adoption projects.
Yeah, so I can give a little overview. So I'm leading, along with Ryan Galuzzo, the mobile driver's license project at the Center of Excellence. And so for those of you who may not be aware of how the NCCoE works, right? So we are in what's called the Applied Cybersecurity Division at NIST. And so at the Center of Excellence, it's our job to actually take what's written in things like 800-63 or any number of standards that might be out there. So for MDL, we're working with ISO standards and OIDF standards. and apply them in a way that we get a bunch of applied lessons learned, that we can show people what the art of the possible is with current off-the-shelf standards, technology. And so we go out and work with a large swath of the ecosystem. So if you go to our website, you can see all the companies we have under CREDA, but we have several technology providers. As Arun mentioned, we have DHS working with us. We have, for our first use case, we're focusing on know your customer requirements for financial institutions. So we have a half a dozen financial institutions working with us. We bring in the standards bodies, right, the people that are writing the work. So we have like OpenID Foundation working with us. And so in this project, what we want to explore is how these mobile driver's licenses, but just larger than that, into the bigger ecosystem of verifiable digital credentials, how they can be used for identity proofing, potentially for authentication, and I can sort of get into some of the reasons we might not want to use them for authentication, but because the standards allow for it, we'll explore it. And then other sort of uses, things like account recovery, for instance, right? So I said earlier about you need a fallback mechanism in authentication systems. Account recovery is usually that. Can we fall back to a better credential, fall back to a better system? If a user, kind of like what Paul was saying earlier, like if they have a user on the front end who's already used this type of credential in MDL, and we know they have it, can we use it for things like account recovery on the back end? And so we're exploring those elements, and we want to do those in a few different flows, right? So we have wallets, digital wallets on the phone, going to a mobile browser, going to another mobile native app, and then also cross-device flows that you might see with a QR code. Mm-hmm. And all of these are in the context of online presentment. And so if you have, who here is in a state with an MDL already and like has it downloaded on their device? Yeah, okay, not a ton. So right now, the only real use case that you can use an MDL for is at TSA. So you can get through in certain TSA locations if your state has an actual ISO compliant MDL solution. So my state of Colorado has two solutions actually. One that's sort of a flash pass solution where it's just kind of a high-res image of your driver's license that you could show to a bouncer, or you can actually show to a clerk at a liquor store and it's accepted there. But that's not a cryptographically verifiable credential. But if you have an actual ISO compliant MDL, which Colorado also has, and Maryland, Virginia, California, Georgia, Utah, there's several states that have this now. You can go through TSA, you can go through security, and you can tap, just as Paul was saying, much like Apple Pay, tap, verify, and off you go. That in-person use case is super interesting, but it's fundamentally a bit more fleshed out. So we're focusing more on, in line with this panel around remote identity proofing, we're focusing on that online use case and how people can get access to online services, conduct online transactions, and do that with these digital credentials that are just more native to that type of transaction. So that's kind of the high-level overview.
Yes, phase one, Bank of NIST.
Correct.
Playing banks.
Mm-hmm.
It's going, I'm looking forward to it. I think there's phase 2, phase 3, so I'm glad that NIST and DHS are putting in resources in driving and helping the adoption, because I think the MDL, you have more than 50% of the state are either already deployed, launched, or are in the process of implementing MDLs. Personally, I work on 5, so I'm aware. But in the same time, I think the adoption is slow because there's not enough use cases. And I think when we see Amazon start accepting it, so is that another TSA killer use case? Maybe we're going to have Amazon killer use case. Start driving. Oh yeah, I should download. Give me a good reason to use it for identity proofing purposes. Or other reasons.
It's slow. It's slow partially because of the use cases, but also, and Paul can comment more on this as he's applying these things. But it's also because the ecosystem is still evolving. There's a lot of questions, right? So in our project with financial institutions, they have interest in this space, right? But they need to understand it. right? So to Arun's point about synthetic identities, right, and where they're created. Until now, using a lot of the credit check tools that are out there, right? They're worried about how do you get a synthetic identity into those types of solutions, right? But now we're talking about using things like MDLs, and we have to worry about, okay, how might attackers try to get a synthetic identity into the DMV, right? And what does that sort of third-party risk look like? We're also wondering, hey, what's that issuance process with all the wallets that are out there, right? So we have platform wallets that exist, right? So when I say platform wallets, I'm thinking of Google and Apple and Samsung's kind of the OEM wallets, right? And then we have, an ecosystem of wallets that is going to be in your app store, right? So IDEMIA has one, Spruce ID, there's a whole bunch of them, right? Scitalis is doing the EU wallet. And so how do they handle that issuance process, right? How is that biometric selfie match done? Do I, as the relying party, feel like I need to do that biometric selfie match? Or can I rely upon that wallet to do that match? So there's just a lot of questions too that we're all figuring out. That's part of the reason that we're doing this project at the center is to, I think if you really distilled NIST down, we are consistently and persistently trying to ask smart questions of industry, right? That's kind of what we do.
Smart or just difficult questions?
Yeah. Sometimes smart questions are difficult to answer, right? But we try to be that continuity of knowledge, that institutional knowledge that continues to push on the markets. I always say that the government intervenes when markets aren't necessarily natively incentivized to do it themselves, right? So that's a lot of what we do at NIST. So we're looking for those killer use cases for sure, like 100%. And we're also looking to shepherd the ecosystem and to help people by asking those difficult questions and providing those lessons learned and trying to keep the ball moving in this space because, to Arun's point, we want to get there, right?
Yeah.
So.
We only have a couple minutes left, and I think I want to give Paul and Arun departing comments, sharing. Then we maybe open the floor for some questions.
Yes, please.
So Paul, what Bill said that you authored the 63.3, or you're one of the authors. Now you're deploying it, you're implementers.
Yep.
Right. And we exchange a lot about mobile ID. So when you think this is gonna coming real, is when Amazon making it real, or what else we need to do to make MDL real in this digital identity proofing ecosystem?
I mean, the chicken or the egg problem still exists. But one thing I really like about Amazon is we're willing to kind of lean into that and smash that problem to pieces and say, let's adopt digital IDs, even if we don't have the penetration that we would expect. So we're hoping to be one of those killer use cases that spurs adoption by citizens and those that have driver's license or passports or the ability to get them onto their phone. But at the same time, so you got two sides of this coin. The first is, it's my job to make this product available, and we're doing that. The chicken or egg problem still exists even if we enable this capability, because I've got to go sell it now to the whole of Amazon. I got to be able to tell Amazon One or Amazon Clinic or One Medical that you're going to get a bump in your metrics. I won't list what those are, because now there are 100 million citizens with an MDL. I can't say that right now. So I'm having adoption problems within our business partners at Amazon for the use cases where they have legitimate needs for remote proofing. So I don't know what the solution is there. I mean, certainly we're willing to joint market and make our, make these announcements with states and with vendors or other partners, whether it's Google or Apple or otherwise. If you saw Abhinav's keynote yesterday, I think we're going to take the lessons learned from passkeys and apply those to mobile driver's licenses as well. So, put them front and center to the consumer. What we do need to think about, be very I don't have a good answer for, and I don't think our partners have a good answer for, is what do you do if somebody lives in a state where MDLs are enabled, but they don't have an MDL? Do you interrupt the journey and say, hey, go get one and come back? Do you not present the option at all? How do you manage that customer experience? Because we don't want to throw friction. We don't want to, have the users bow out because we're telling them to go out off of Amazon into some other flow. So that's an area where we could use some help from the MDL vendors and states. But yeah, I think I answered that. If not, you can tell me.
No, it's good. Arun, what do you think about MDL? I mean, he didn't brag about it, but Arun, you were one of the first to actually start testing the MDL so that to enable the TSA pilot, right? You did it before the TSA can go to do the test out the MDL pilot. So now in hindsight, what do you think about, is there any other DHS use case we can enable than just TSA checkpoint?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So first of all, we've been tracking MDL work for actually a lot of the early work came out of NIST with the InStick work way back when, right? Mm-hmm. So credit goes to some of that.
Where's Jeremy? Wait, Jeremy!
Yeah, there we go. So credit goes there, and the states help carry this forward, right? And the way I look at it, it's like there are competing efforts, competing things here. I do not want to put my thumb on the scale one way or the other, right? So we're letting, this is what industry does well, right? And let the marketplace decide on how these standards play out. But yeah, we did a lot of work with TSA to support their interest in kind of using MDL, largely because, it's cryptographically verifiable digital credential that can be used to verify who you are at the checkpoint. We worked with NIST and kind of developed this, not only to support the standards development, but also the development of readers, of MDL readers, which I think we're going to open source here and there.
It can be physical or digital.
But yeah, that's right.
Reader doesn't have to be physical. Yes.
It doesn't have to be physical, right? And
yes.
we're actually, I think we're going to be releasing some of the code for that here in the near future so people can play with it themselves. And one of the nice things here is TSA was a really powerful partner here because they were forward-leaning and they understood the value here. But they also they do rulemaking for Real ID. Right? I'm sure you guys have a lot of feelings about Real ID. But the point is, it's a regulation about how government-wide the government will accept will accept credentials, identity credentials. And it's been amended so that we could support digital identity credentials. So there's an opportunity here to look at how a lot of, not just DHS, but federal-wide, how the federal government will accept both credentials for in-person or online identity processes. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I think at the end of the day, though, we still have to balance this thing about like the people who are savvy and understand how to use these technologies, the people who either don't know it, don't trust it, or just may not have the things they need to be able to access those technologies. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a smartphone, it's really going to be hard to do an MDL. Well, 85% of the population probably do, 15% don't, and we have to make sure we're inclusive of them as well.
Well, thank you. We do have 1 minute and 25 seconds for questions. So first come, first serve. Any questions? And I did not come up with like planting questions, so no questions.
Yes.
Jamie, come on, okay.
Couldn't resist, although I think I have to hold this up a little bit. Thanks Arun for the shout out to what we did in NSTIC. Some people forget that it was that program that funded the initial MDL pilots and I think, planted some seeds, not that we had any of it figured out then, but at least got the idea out there to get to the point where we're at today. Part question, part comment, I guess comment to get reactions on, which is, so much of the, I think the work that's been done and that's been discussed on this panel and just in the broader ecosystem has made clear a lot of the challenges with remote digital identity proofing is we're basically historically in the US dependent on a bunch of vendors that are trying to guess what only the government knows, and that government's the only nationally recognized authoritative issuer of identity. That's from a mix of federal and state and local officials, and all of the other tools that we have are looking at stuff. Sometimes they do it pretty well, but everybody's trying to guess what's happening without actually accessing the authoritative source. And some of you have heard me say this before, nothing's perfect in that space, but there is stuff that sucks less than some of the other tools that are out there. And so, I know on one hand we've been looking at things like DocAuth with driver's licenses and selfie match and showing the error rates aren't really what you might want from, say, enterprise class solution. The flip side is you're going back to, say, data broker data if you're not using that, which can be even worse. And so part of this was just a comment to point out we have a long way to go, but there's a lot of things that are out there today that even if they're not perfect, do suck less than the tools that they're replacing. And then, of course, I think, hopefully if we get things right, MDLs and other MDocs are going to maybe not suck at all, but we'll see where that goes.
Thank you, Jeremy. With that,
Thank you.
thank you for coming.